So we've talked about the 5-step sequential evaluation and the 3 stages of a Social Security case. So how do people like I get paid? Well, it's 25% of the back benefits up to a maximum of $7,200. The fee was raised in November of 2022, and it comes from back benefits. So I have an example here on the slide. If in this particular instance, the person is disabled as of January 1st, 2022, there's the 5-month waiting period. That ends May 31st, 2022. Benefits are paid in May of 2023 at $3,000 a month. 12 times 3 is $36,000. 20% of that is $9,000. So the fee is capped at $7,200. It's a one-time fee. Now, people can petition for a fee that's higher than the 25%. Has to be approved by judges, and judges aren't necessarily automatically going to be approving a fee request in excess of the maximum fee. There are costs that are incurred in cases. Some lawyers will advance costs. I don't advance costs. I do ask that they be reimbursed at the end of the case, and costs are basically the cost of getting the medical records, because you can't win without getting the medical records. As I said, it's a one-time fee. So when you get your benefits, you're not going to be paying or shouldn't be paying your lawyer a monthly fee from those ongoing benefits. If you change a lawyer, generally the lawyers will work out the fee entitlement. And that's particularly true if, for example, you have an ERISA disability claim and the disability carrier has said, well, we recommend that you use this particular company, which I don't recommend. But ultimately you choose another Social Security ERISA disability attorney, then I end up dealing with that as anybody else would deal with that fee. And many times they'll just waive their fee. So you're not going to have to pay a double fee. I want to make that clear. If there's a fee dispute, generally it's between lawyers and it's addressed generally by lawyers, and rarely does the court get involved because the lawyers will get it resolved. Now, why do you need an attorney? Abraham Lincoln once said, a person who represents himself has a fool for a client. Now, I am a highly specialized lawyer, but if I were to need a will or an estate, or I was going to buy a piece of real estate, I would not be representing myself. I wouldn't be doing my own will. I wouldn't be doing my own estate. I wouldn't be doing my own closing, because I don't know anything. Even though I'm a lawyer, that's not my area of specialty. You may be the smartest person in your family, in your industry, but I assure you that when you are disabled, you don't have either the physical or the cognitive stamina to really do this right. And I will tell you, Social Security is not your friend, and they're not in the business of paying benefits. If you think you're going to, be at the mercy of the judge, and the judge is going to see how disabled you are, that's not going to happen. The judge is going to apply the 5-step sequential evaluation over and over and over. So regardless of how disabled you think you are, regardless of how obvious or not obvious it is, you can't count on the Social Security Administration or the judge to do the right thing. The win rate with lawyers representing people is higher. We take them on a contingency fee basis. So no fee unless we win. And there is no fee, by the way, as we're handling the claim. Cases, these are very medically and vocationally complex cases, and they're very poorly understood by the Social Security Administration. And I'll tell you more about that. And for the most part, as a practical matter, they don't have any protocol for evaluating these cases. And many times, as I've said, there's just not the proper case development of the records and the right RFCs. There's not a proper preparation of the client. There's not, you got to have a brief written, and, a 5-page brief sounds pretty simple, but in fact it's not, because you have to point to the verse and page, if you will, of the medical records to establish that you might need a listing, or support the fact that you have restrictions that would preclude you from doing your past relevant work or other work. And of course, you need representation at trial. And many times, if you show up unrepresented, the judge will suggest strongly that you get an attorney, and will continue the hearing until you do that. And of course, you don't know how to cross-examine a vocational evaluator, regardless of how many times you've seen a legal show on TV. So the other thing I talk to my clients about is what's at stake here? What's at stake here are monthly benefits from the end of the waiting period until the retirement age. So if you're getting $4,000 a month in benefits, that's $36,000 to $48,000 a year. And even if you're getting $1,000 a month, 1,000 is 1,000 is 1,000, which is better than zero. You also get cost of living adjustment benefits, and as you may know, there was a huge increase in benefits because of the large COLA. And of course, once you become eligible for your Social Security, Disability, or SSI benefits, you are getting lifetime medical benefits in the form of Medicare or Medicaid. And that, to me, that's a lot at stake, particularly in today's environment. So that's why I think you need to have an attorney. So how about if we take a break, and then I'm going to get into the various medical conditions, and we're going to talk about each one of them, how Social Security views them, and I'm going to give you some tips for how I think they can be won.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. Why doesn't everybody take a stretch and maybe go to the bathroom, get something to drink, because we all need to be drinking. Oh, good. Look, as I said that, Nancy was. All right. Take a break, everyone.
Great. Well, welcome back, everyone. What I'd like to do now is to talk about each of the medical conditions that I deal with in this particular sphere. I am obviously not a doctor, but I think it's really important that my clients understand the disease process and that you be represented by a lawyer who understands the nature of the disease, the symptoms, how it impacts your functionality, and how you specifically experience the dysfunction or the disease, so that the appropriate records, medical records and RFC forms and your testimony are properly developed. So bear with me if you are familiar with this, but I want to kind of use this description of each of these diseases to kind of set the stage. So let's first talk about autonomic dysfunction. The autonomic nervous system, known as the ANS, controls the heart rate, body temperature, breathing rate, digestion, and sensation. It's basically the connection between your brain and body parts and your internal organs. And there are two types of autonomic nervous systems. There is the sympathetic and there is the parasympathetic, SANS and PANS. SANS will stimulate organs like the heart, liver, sweat glands, skin, digestive, and urinary system, while the PANS slows down that bodily process. So I'm always interested in hearing from my clients what problems they might have with their heart, their liver, sweat glands, skin, digestive, and urinary issues, and how that may vary depending on the nature of their symptoms. And as we all know, it can vary hour to hour, day to day. The autonomic dysfunction occurs when the nerves of the ANS are damaged, and that can be chronic and it can be worsened over time. Now, what's important about this, again, is, I keep on banging on the history of the symptoms and functionality. And because these problems will generally worsen over time, I think it's really good that you are giving an interval history of the progression of your symptoms. I represent a lot of diabetics. I'm very active in the PD community, and there are chronic conditions that also will involve autonomic dysfunctions. And in those cases, we're also obviously want our clients to explain the progression of the symptoms from a diabetic standpoint or from a PD standpoint. But when we have autonomic dysfunction issues, I always want a good history of those symptoms and how they impact functionality. Now, normally what we'll see is dizziness and fainting when standing up, known as orthostatic hypotension. And then we have heart rate issues, we have sweating abnormalities, we have digestive problems, urinary problems, visual issues. I know it can be very difficult to talk about things like urinary or bowel and bladder issues, but that is very important because the need to use a restroom, need to be close to a restroom, the frequency with which you have to use a restroom can impact that ability to maintain the pace and production requirements of full-time employment. So I want things like that really well developed in the medical records. Now, there are a number of different types of autonomic dysfunction. The primary ones that I will see are POTS and the neurocardiogenic syncope. I have cases where there are autonomic dysfunction as a result of autoimmune disorders, which we'll touch on later. So those are generally the three that we see in the context of a Social Security or disability claim. All right, so let's contrast this with autoimmune disorders. Autonomic disorders are not the same as autoimmune disorders, and autoimmune disorders are not the same as autonomic disorders. But if you have an autoimmune disorder, you can have an autonomic issue. Okay, and so autoimmune diseases arise from an abnormal immune response of the body against substances and tissues that are normally present in your body. Localized autoimmune diseases generally affect certain tissues or body organs. For example, Crohn's, diabetes. Systemic autoimmune disorder affects body systems, and that generally will involve multiple body systems, such as MS or rheumatoid arthritis. And a systemic autoimmune disorder is more complex because of the multi-body system involvement. And again, in a Social Security case, I want to develop every medical condition that I can to win the claim. Now, what I am seeing in autoimmune disorders, by the way, is a lot of post-COVID development of autoimmune disorders. I'm also seeing post-COVID aggravation of pre-existing autoimmune disorder. And I'm seeing post-COVID development of systemic body disorders and autoimmune disorders. So it's a really mixed bag that we're seeing with post-COVID issues. Now, again, without getting into a lot of detail, Social Security is going to want to see positive lab work and diagnostic studies that will confirm both autonomic dysfunction and autoimmune disorders. And generally, they are looking for positive lab work and other objective diagnostic studies to be found in the medical records. Let's talk about POTS. Now that we've sort of set the stage between the difference of autonomic dysfunction and autoimmune dysfunction, I'm going to go back to the autonomic issues. Because again, even in the cases where we've got the autoimmune issues, we are seeing autonomic issues, one of which is POTS. So Social Security does not understand the term POTS. They don't understand the symptoms of POTS. They don't understand the type and causes of POTS. They don't understand excessive heart rate increases in POTS, with particularly in cases where there is normal cardiac function, if you will, and they don't necessarily get the listings that are potentials in a Social Security claim. So let's take this word apart: postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So postural refers to the position of your body. So in your medical records, I would want to see you giving a history to the physician of problems that you're having with the positioning of your body. Because remember, we have to prove you can't even do a sedentary job. And most of the sedentary jobs involve postural issues: turning, twisting, standing, bending, stooping, that sort of thing. Orthostatic refers to the act of standing up. So what's happening to your body when you stand up? And of course, tachycardia refers to an increase in the heart rate. And the syndrome is the group of symptoms, the constellation of symptoms. And I would like to see in the medical records you basically breaking down your symptoms in terms of postural, orthostatic, tachycardia, and then any other syndrome symptoms that you have. That's the best way, I think, to tell the story. And that's what I'm telling my clients from the beginning. So Social Security doesn't get what each of these mean in terms of your symptoms and functionality. So it's up to you to make sure you're explaining that. Now, there are 4 types of POTS. Let's talk about neuropathic POTS. It's associated with damage to the small nerve fibers that regulate the constriction of blood vessels in limbs and the abdomen. And this can cause symptoms of dysfunction in the limbs and the gastroenterological system. And so there isn't a listing for POTS. So we go searching around for listings that we can try to meet. And that, of course, is in part based on your symptoms. So we can look at Section 11, the neurological listings, Section 5, the gastrointestinal listings. There's hydrogenic POTS, which is associated with a loss of the norepinephrine. I'm sorry, I can never say this word. Norepinephrine, that can cause tremors, cold sweats, extremities, migraine headaches, and increased urination. So I'm looking in the medical records for tremors. That impacts your ability to use both your hands, bilateral manual dexterity. Cold and sweaty extremities, obviously that would result in environmental restrictions. Migraine headaches can also result in restrictions and limitations because of the functional issues associated with the migraine, where you're flat in a cold, dark room. And urination, obviously, is the need to go to the bathroom. There is urological listings, but there aren't any listings for migraines. So as we break down your symptoms and the type of POTS, then we're looking at listings. Hypovolemic POTS is associated with low levels of blood. That causes weakness and decreased tolerance for activity. And there is no equivalent listing. But again, I'm into symptoms. And then there's secondary POTS, which is associated with other conditions, such as diabetes, Lyme, lupus, Sjogren's. And these can cause POT-like symptoms. And additionally, we're dealing with symptoms of the underlying disease. There's no listing for secondary POTS. So again, I'm looking at where can I potentially get them? Maybe I can get them in a lupus listing. Maybe I can get them in a diabetes listing. So again, 4 types, and we're trying to get as close as we can to a listing. Now, let's talk about the diagnosis of POTS. As you have all unfortunately experienced, not all doctors get POTS. In fact, very few of I'm going to call the traditional mainstream doctors, family doctors, even emergency room doctors, neurologists, cardiologists don't always get POTS, and you'll present and they'll say it's all in your head or some other things. And so it's really important that you're treating with, being evaluated and treated with a POTS specialist. What's key for Social Security is the physical exam, any blood work, the standing test, or the heads-up tilt table test. Now, as we know, when you do the tilt test, what you are looking for is an abnormal heart rate response to being upright. Your symptoms worsen when upright, and you don't develop the orthostatic hypotension in the first 3 minutes. Social Security will pay attention to that, but even if you have a negative tilt test, doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily question the diagnosis, particularly when there are other tests that are corroborative of POTS. I always want to make sure that these tests are documented in the medical records. There have been times, quite frankly, when I've actually had to have a second read on the results of the tilt table test to show, in fact, that the cardiologist misread it. So again, I'm always looking at the diagnosis. Social Security is going to be looking at the diagnosis. Now, one of the things that is a bit problematic, as you know, is that there are similar medical symptoms of similar medical conditions. There's ME/CFS, there is fibromyalgia, and you will see an overlap of symptoms. And so they are generally looking for a rule out of those medical conditions. Though I've had clients who have all of that, all of these conditions in combination.